When speaking about connatural knowledge, or knowledge through affectivity, knowledge through emotions, the knowledge is useful because it helps us understand what we can do in life and also what we can make in life. This kind of connatural knowledge literally helps us navigate our way through sometimes unknown experiences. The idea of knowledge through connaturality that helps us make things becomes very important in disciplines related to the fine arts. And this is a lot of the work of contemporary philosopher Jacques Maritain, who revived this scholastic idea of connaturality, or knowledge through connaturality, in some of his significant works, Poetry and Creative Intuition as an example. Like a knowledge that has to do with what I do, knowledge through what I make is rule-driven. We can think, for example, of, let's make a boat. Well, if I want to make a boat, there are certain rules about how I would make the thing we call a boat. The boat would have to have certain functionality to it. For example, it would have to float. It would have to get me to where I want to go. So it would have to not simply float, but it somehow have to be able to move in a way that would allow me to direct the movement. And in the actual physical construction, I would need to follow a different kind of set of rules. For example, there might be rules related to the physics of the materials that I'm going to use, or engineering rules related to how the particular kind of boat is going to be constructed. And in all of this, when the item is completed, we're going to call it a boat if it fulfills all the obligations of those rules. In art, the rules are extended, as it were, or we can maybe say something's added to the simple rules. And this is where we would distinguish between craft, like the craft of making a boat, from art, the art of making a boat, where somehow we enter into or engage in this, what the scholastics would call, spiritual side of ourselves. Now, right away, we want to distinguish that word, because spiritual in this sense doesn't have anything to do with religion. Spiritual has to do more with our capacity for reasoning. And what the scholastics meant by this term spiritual had to do with our capacity to transcend the material world, to think, if you will, in terms of abstraction or infinity, if you will. These are signs or examples of what it means to be a spiritual creature. And in this worldview, human beings are embodied spirits. So we have this capacity to think abstractly, to think in a transcendent manner. We can think forever. We can think one thought, and then we can think another thought, and another thought, on and on and on. And that demonstrates this spiritual side of the human person. In the example of how I act, we can think of, again, the virtue of justice. And I can choose, through my will, to act with justice. But the question arises, why would I want to do that? Why would I want to act with justice? One reason might be because if I don't act with justice, I will get in trouble. That's a reasoned response. But because we're spiritual beings, we can have a hierarchical order to that reasoning, just as with the things that we're going to do. So I can say, for example, well, it's not simply that I'm afraid of breaking a rule or I'm afraid of getting in trouble. I want to act with justice because I care for you as a subject. Or I might want to say, I act for justice because it's the right thing to do. In the first instance, where I'm acting for justice because I care for you, there's a specific reason, if you will. There's a specific intention, you, the other person, whoever you happens to be. But when I come to the moment in my decision-making process where I somehow name it as the right thing to do, I'm in this world of spiritual thinking or transcendent thinking or abstract thinking. And there's no there, so to speak, other than I've created this hierarchical order of values where the behavior in and of itself is seen to be a value. It's the right thing to do. This is what we call moral behavior or moral thinking, where in our code of conduct, we have this hierarchical ordering, which leads to this moment where I say, this is the right thing to do. And it would be therefore how I would hope to guide and direct my life. What's the analogy to it's the right thing to do in the world of making? When I make a boat, there I've made a boat, and it's functional. Is that the end of it? Why is it, for example, that we don't just make boats? We make luxury cruise liners, which are elaborate, they're extravagant, they're filled with detail that is totally superfluous, if you will, to the functional level of the boat. Why is it that we do this? Well, we might explore that in a stepwise fashion by first saying it's fun. It's fun to go on a luxury cruise. It's fun to see all these things. I get some kind of pleasure, if you will, out of the experience of the luxury liner that I don't necessarily get when I'm on the boat. Well, here we are back at that level of emotion, that level of knowledge that's coming literally through my body, where I'm having a good time, if you want to put it that way. We have similar kinds of experiences when, for example, we take a hike in the woods, or we go to the Grand Canyon, and sometimes these experiences are very dramatic, where we are struck profoundly with this positive experience, which we label differentially, but sometimes, most frequently, we would say it's an awe-filled moment where, again, the Grand Canyon, standing in that open space, we are just struck silent because what's before us is, if you will, so pleasurable that it shuts down our vocal capacity to express, and we just stand there stupidly before this amazing thing. The way the Greeks and the scholastics would describe this is beauty. It's that experience of pleasure, but in this very transcendental or abstract way that what I am now encountering is good for me. But its good is so profound that I can't even verbalize why it is that this is good or how I even know that this is good. But that's knowledge in the speculative sense. The value of recognizing connatural knowledge is that this level, in these kinds of experiences, I'm knowing something. I know that this thing is a good for me. Maybe I can't tell you why I know that, but I do know it. When the scholastics and the Greeks are talking about this experience of beauty, they would identify the beautiful with certain characteristics. For example, they would say that there has to be a certain proportionality to the object or the experience, and a certain kind of fittingness. So, the example of the boat again. If the boat doesn't have the right proportions, it's obviously not going to float, and it's therefore not going to fulfill its purpose. If the boat isn't fitting as a boat, if it doesn't look like a boat and act like a boat, it's not a boat. And we're going to say maybe it's an ugly boat. We're not going to say it's a beautiful boat. But if it's functional, we're going to say it's a beautiful boat. With some items, though, we're going to say something else. The scholastics used the Latin word, which doesn't really translate well into English, claritas. Now, that sounds like clarity, but it means a little bit more than clarity. Claritas, when we're speaking about a quality or an aspect of the beautiful, is an aspect or an element of the object or the person that speaks a level of truth, if you will, and brings forth clarity not simply about itself, but also about me. So that the Greeks and the scholastics would say that the beautiful is the splendor of truth. Beauty, if you will, breaks forth or illuminates that which is true and that which is good. The claritas that comes from an experience of the beautiful comes to us at this connatural level. It comes to us through our affective experience. Maritain calls it an affective resonance. Literally, our body is resonating with that thing or that person we experience as beautiful. It's that resonance which allows us to know this is a good for me. Perhaps the most striking example of this in our own Catholic tradition is the Genesis creation story that comes to us from the second chapter of Genesis. Here we have God creating Adam out of the stuff of the earth, Adamah, and putting him in a garden. After God puts Adam in the garden, God then tells Adam, you can name all the creatures. God doesn't give Adam a naming lesson or instruct them in the functionality of any of these creatures. God just literally lets Adam go. Because Adam knows all of these creatures through this connatural level, he is able to properly discern the name. And each creature that is given its name, the name that God would have given it because God knows every creature intimately, but because God has created Adam, God wants Adam to participate in that process and gives him the full capacity through connaturality to name all the creatures. The purpose, if you will, of the exercise was so that Adam could find a helpmate. But as he's going through this process of naming each and every creature because he knows it on this connatural level, there's a problem. None of the creatures is capable of serving as the helpmate. So God takes another step, puts Adam in a deep sleep, takes a rib out, creates Eve. Upon seeing Eve, Adam exclaims and defines for us the very essence of connatural knowledge. This one at last is bone of my bones, flesh of my flesh. Now God didn't sit Adam down before showing Adam Eve and say, I just made this new creature, it comes from you, it looks like you, it's going to talk like you, etc. Adam knew that. And Adam knew that at a profound and deep level. This is the claritas that comes to us through knowledge, through connaturality. And it's the very fundamental aspect of a relationship of what I make with beauty. This idea of knowledge through connaturality as it relates to art and beauty is one of the key reasons why I feel a recovery of an awareness of this way of knowing is so critical in the 21st century. We need to know through speculative means. We need to use our reason. We need to be able to measure and uncover the secrets of the world around us. But we also need to resonate with the world around us. We need to recognize that the world is constantly, if you will, speaking to us of its goodness, of its beauty. And as I sharpen this awareness of my own resonance, like Adam when he saw Eve, then the world becomes meaningful for me in a very different way. Not simply something I can use, something I can own, but something that is like me. Because every creature has been made by God and all of the inanimate objects have also been made by God, there is this level of resonance, small though it be, with a rock. There's a level of resonance, small though it might be, with a plant, with animals. And of course, we come to the greatest level of resonance with other human beings. And this is what we define as love, where we see another and we see somehow the good in the other, but simultaneously we see that the other is also a good for me. We have been being called in so many different ways in the last few decades to respect the planet, to care for our environment, to learn to live deeply, as it were, with the world around us. Connaturality can help us recover the value of that and even provide us with some tools for recognizing that this is a value for me, this is a good for me. And perhaps even more importantly, as we seek to encounter other human beings in what we now describe as a global world, a global civilization, a global economy, this awareness, each and every person has that capacity to co-resonate, to inspire beauty in me, in others, will lead us to a greater openness to accept the other, no matter how different the other might be, because there's a level at which that other is like me, that other is for me. And if we can recover this awareness of this way of knowing, I think we'll be able to move forward in a more profound and life-giving manner.